I'd like to start out first by thanking Terry and Kurt for their work in putting together a really illustrious and very good panel for today's discussion, which, as you learned when we sent out the link, is going to be on commercial real estate. A lot of people focusing on State Street and other kinds of issues in the Madison area. We've kind of gotten into this a little bit in our discussions of other effects of the pandemic on employment and the like. So this is really going to be a great discussion, I know. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry, and away we go.
Thanks, Dennis. And thanks to everybody out there for joining us. I know weather's changing, and I assume a lot of our audience probably has their second shot. It might be running around doing other things. But this is a great program, I think, this morning. I'm really pleased to have three people who are really knowledgeable about what's happened in Madison over the last number of years. We're going to start out with Aaron Olver, who is head of University Research Park. And Aaron is a former Secretary of Commerce, and he also directed economic development for the city of Madison and did some work for McKinsey, I believe, right? Aaron, is that correct?
Correct.
And then he'll give us sort of the 10,000 foot view and some other ideas. And then Sue Springman will come in after that. And Sue's a longtime real estate broker developer in Madison and Dane County. She's currently senior project manager at Mullins Group. And looking at your LinkedIn, Sue, which I had to find all of the things you've done, but executive director of DMI, assistant to Mayor Joel Skornica. And I didn't realize you actually worked for Tommy in his administration with the building services, which included the Capitol and the governor's mansion, or executive residence, excuse me. And then many of you will know about her with her fingerprints on State Street Mall, the Capitol Concourse, as well as University Square. And then finally, we'll have Marc Eisen sort of batting cleanup and maybe butting in along the way too. Some of you may have seen the article that Marc did in the last month on two-part on State Street and what's happening with it. I think it ran in business. But Marc, you will probably remember and know very well. He held basically every job in Isthmus, from city editor to managing editor to editor, executive editor. Also did a stint at the Cap Times and is now a freelance writer. So Aaron, you've got some slides you want to do and take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Terry, for the introduction. I am going to speak from a couple slides, and I have to tell you, I am a little bit nervous. I had Dennis Dresang as a professor when I was at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So hopefully he likes my slides and is going to give me an A today. And my parents are also out in the audience today. So I'm being watched, but hi, Mom and Dad. I am going to start today at a pretty high level, talking a little bit about what I call innovation geography. And that, I think, will lead really naturally into Sue's comments. And so I want to start with what I call the Minnesota conundrum. You know, if you look at the economies of Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're very similar in many, many ways. We're about the same size states. We have sort of a similar history in terms of agriculture and industrialization. Culturally, we're very similar. And yet, when you look at Minnesota, on almost every economic measure, they're outperforming us. Their GDP is currently about 13% higher than ours per person. And similarly, their personal income is about 11% higher. So what's going on with this? Well, a lot of people want to make this a political argument. They'll say it was sort of a cottage industry for a while to say that Mark Dayton was simply a better governor than Scott Walker, and that it was policy differences that accounted for this diverging trajectory. But if you actually look at the data, it's just not true. This is a chart that's showing GDP per capita since 1963. And I kind of cut it off in the mid 90s there, but you can kind of see that back in the 60s, they were roughly equal. And sometime in the 70s, the purple line is Minnesota, the gopher color. It starts to pull away from the Packer color. And, you know, if you look at other measures, you see exactly the same thing. Here's personal income over an even longer period of time. And again, you can see that even when I was Commerce Secretary, this trend continued. So it really isn't about politics or public policy. There's something else going on here. And I don't know that it's been fully explained or studied, but what I'd submit to you is that it's about innovation. That what happened in the 70s that started to cause these economies to diverge was you started to see technology and the innovation economy supersede the manufacturing economy. Apple Computer in the computer space was founded in 1976, as was the first real biotech company, Genentech. And I think it's no surprise that here in Dane County, our analog companies, Epic Systems, founded in the late 70s, and Promega, our first life science company, founded in the late 70s as well. And the reason that this is kind of interesting is that innovation has a very peculiar relationship to geography that manufacturing and agriculture just doesn't have. And that is that it benefits from scale. So if you think about the way a community grows, if you double the size of a city, you need to double some things like the number of housing units. And there's some things that you can use more intensively, like roads or gas stations or cable or fiber that's laid into the ground. But innovation has a very peculiar feature to economists. It seems to scale with increasing returns, which is to say, the more people you get, the more you cluster people together, the more innovation output you get. So when you look at Minnesota, here's what I think is really going on. The Minneapolis, St. Paul area is about 2/3 of the state population lives in that single metro region. Here in Wisconsin, we are all spread out. Madison's only about 11% of the state population, and even Milwaukee, our biggest city, that metro region is just over 1/4 of the state. And so you see this pattern play out over and over again in almost any benchmark that you look at. So for example, if innovation and scale didn't grow together, this is what patents generated per 1,000 residents might look like. You would think that innovation would just be kind of randomly distributed, and that here I have kind of a hypothetical example with quartiles of cities by population. So you'd sort of imagine that the amount of patents that you generated per person, if you will, was the same regardless of whether you were in a small city or whether you were in a large city. But that really doesn't happen. This is what the pattern actually looks like. The biggest cities in the country, the top quartile of cities, are producing more than twice as many patents per capita as the smallest quartile of cities in America. And you can kind of see that it's growing continuously through those quartiles. Here's another metric. This is math and computer science occupations per 1,000 residents. And you see exactly the same pattern. That top quartile is about 20 times larger than the smallest quartile, and yet it's about 47 times more densely populated with math and computer science occupations. So there's this very interesting feature that allows innovation to benefit from scale. And I think that has a lot of implications around the country. One of the things it means is that you're increasingly seeing wealth concentrated in urban areas. And unlike manufacturing, which could kind of be spread around according to where there were highways or geographic proximity to markets or access to things like harbors or waterways or power plants, innovation seems to cluster in cities. It likes to be in a densely populated area where there can be knowledge spillovers, where you can have chance happenings and ideas spreading and bouncing. It's a lot like a college campus in many ways. When you pack people into a tight space and kind of set them off interacting randomly, you get good ideas and you get innovation, and that fuels this sector of the economy. And of course, one of the challenges with it is it's not spread totally equally. There's winner cities and there's loser cities. So of course, San Francisco and Boston and places like that are winner cities, and places like Detroit and Cincinnati and maybe Miami aren't winning quite as much as other cities. So the good news for Madison is that we're clearly one of the winner cities. And I think it's no surprise to this audience that the reason for that is the University of Wisconsin-Madison. When you look at our university, we do more research spending here in absolute dollars than almost any other university in the country. We're constantly in the top 10. Even if our rank is slipping a few notches, we remain in the top 10, and we're out punching Harvard and MIT and Stanford. And we're well over the average of the top 50 research universities in the country. And you can really see the impact of how Madison is helping our community punch way above its weight class. So this is a little regression line I did. This is all of the kind of medium size to large, kind of medium, large cities in the country. So the population is on that bottom axis, the x-axis, and the number of patents that they've generated is on the y-axis. And then I've dropped a regression line in there. And I took out all of the patents generated by the University of Wisconsin-Madison, although I left in all the patents generated by University of Wisconsin spinouts. So this is even this is a little unfair. And you can kind of see that if we don't include the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we're basically just above the regression line. We're pretty much exactly where you would expect us to be for our population. But here's where we actually are when you include the University of Wisconsin. We jump way up, well above that line. And the company that we're keeping now are places like Research Triangle Park and kind of the distant suburbs or next communities out from Boston and New York and Los Angeles. So a very good company to keep.
Wow.
And what that's doing is it's translating to jobs. So here are the top 20, what economists call clusters. So these are kind of the major industries that are driving the economy and that export goods to other places. So this is not your restaurants or your barbershops or your grocery stores. These are things like life science, software, manufacturing, professional services. And along the x-axis, I've graphed how big these clusters are by employment. So you can see that line is kind of running from 0 up to 30,000 employees. And then on the y-axis, I've graphed how fast they're growing on an annual basis over the last 10 years or so. This data is from 2008 to 2018, which is the most recent year I could get. And so you can see, first of all, that most of the top 20 clusters have actually shrunk over this period. They're actually below that line. And there's really only 2 that have any scale and that are growing. You've got life sciences. So that's, exact sciences, that's biotech, that's, companies that are at Research Park. And you've got IT and analytical instruments. And that is kind of 2 categories. That is companies like Epic Systems that are in the software space. And it's also the analytical instrument side are companies like what used to be tomotherapy is now Accuray. So medical devices, GE's Madison facility is in that bucket. So these are kind of healthcare apparatus and software kind of companies. And so you can directly see that, the university not only has a big effect on intellectual productivity, but it's also driving the 2 clusters that are producing all of the job growth in Madison. You can see insurance at about 15,000 jobs in the county is actually shrinking. Business services is really a big employer, but it's kind of stagnant. And when you start to look at these, you'll even kind of notice that the ones that are growing are kind of in that creative space. They're not necessarily the traditional industries. Ag is kind of just a step away from life science. Performing arts, marketing, and design are both growing, but somewhat slower, and they're a little smaller. But I think it's interesting that kind of creativity is what's being rewarded. And so here are the implications. First of all, we should feel great because the Madison area is doing well. We're clearly one of the regions that's winning this because we have the ability to compete in these innovation sectors. And that, of course, is because of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We're not only producing a lot of patents that become companies and oftentimes land in the research park, but we're generating all sorts of relationships with industry, and we're educating a new generation of workers and scientists. And I think the benefits of higher education are really well understood. But I think there's a third implication, which is Madison is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to power the state's economy. But what we really need to do is be thoughtful about how we grow. You can create a lot of problems. And I think Madison, unfortunately, has created a lot of problems by basically allowing growth to happen through sprawl. And when you're relatively small, it's not that big of a deal to kind of go one cornfield farther out and put your next employer or your next development farther and farther out. But of course, over time, you become Chicago or Los Angeles with their traffic problems and their lack of transit, or Atlanta is another great example of a community that's kind of blown transit. And so Madison is kind of on a cusp where I think we're trying to go in the right direction. We're trying to be more transit oriented. We're trying to focus on infill. We're trying to create whole neighborhoods where we can cluster housing and employment together. But it's not clear to me that we're actually going to do that successfully. And so I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today about opportunities that Madison has to do some really strong infill development. And I'm happy to tell you a little bit about what Research Park is doing on the west side of Madison to try to be part of the answer to this problem and to support our tenants. But I think there's a lot of other opportunities in Madison. When you look at the University Avenue corridor, when you look at Park Street, when you look at what's going on in the Cap East district, I think Sue's going to talk about State Street. And then, of course, Sherman Avenue and Oscar Mayer. These all represent great opportunities to grow Madison in a way that can really accommodate the growth that's going to happen driven by innovation, but to also do it in a fairly compact way that can really support attracting and retaining the kind of knowledge workers and to make that economic prosperity more broadly accessible, more transit accessible, and more accessible to more people in neighborhoods without getting in cars or getting stuck in traffic. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation, and I'm going to turn it over to Sue to take us from 10,000 feet down to maybe 500 feet.
I'm going to talk about the downtown, and I think that Terry mentioned some of my background, and I've been involved in the downtown for about 40 years. In the beginning of the 70s, when many of you, if you were around then, remember that State Street and the downtown was not very strong at the time. We had a lot of empty buildings, a lot of disinvestment, and growth was occurring in the suburbs. And then things changed over every decade, fortunately. And I can remember in 2019 walking around the square thinking, oh my God, we're so fortunate to have this city and this downtown because we have people from all over the world that come here to see it. And then COVID hit and civil unrest. And if you've been downtown, you can see what State Street and the downtown looks like right now. So we'll want to go into the future. But one thing I want to mention is that the downtown economy is critical to the city of Madison in terms of the tax base that it provides, and it will continue to be that. As Aaron says, density and development, there's been a huge amount of redevelopment around the downtown with housing and commercial, and there's more hopefully planned. The greater downtown, the map that I had sent you, Terry, if somebody could put that up, I define the greater downtown as from Camp Randall to the Yahara River. And then the central downtown is Blair Street to Park Street. There's $5 billion of assessed value in land in the greater downtown area. and $3 billion in the central downtown. 1,952 acres in the greater downtown and 608 in central downtown. And we have a lot of non-taxable land in that area. I think it reaches about 60%. So that amount of assessed value, even with the amount of land that's off the tax rolls, is very significant. In the next 20 years, it is anticipated that the central downtown will increase by another $1 billion, and the Capital East about $704 million. This was taken from Vanderwall and Associates. They're putting together an economic study that isn't quite finished yet because they're waiting for the census to update it. So this is a lot of information, not the assessed value, that's current, but some information they have is not current. It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of the census. But they compared it to different areas of the city and commercial growth elsewhere. And the downtown is really one of the biggest areas of assessed value. We create 10% in the central downtown of the city's tax base and 15% in the greater downtown. So that will be even greater potentially in the next 20 years. So we're very fortunate to have that. Central downtown is 10 times the city's assessed value per person, and it's 15% of the city's commercial tax base, and that's pretty significant. Another aspect of our economy that's important is the visitor spending and taxes that are generated from that in just our downtown. When you think about like Destination Madison, which is our visitor and convention bureau, when they bring people to this city, they want to know that our downtown is vibrant, and they don't bring people here to go to Easttown and Westtown. They come to see the university, the Capitol, State Street. That's why it's so critical what's happening now, what we do into the future. But we get $38 million of state and local tax revenue, which is generated from tourism. That's from just the downtown. And $303 million is visitor spending. We have almost 5,000 jobs that are supported by visitor activities. Very significant. We generated in the downtown 25% of the city's room tax in 2019. And there's a total of 18.8 million of total tax. And, you know, the city relies on that considerably. It's very important that that money be generated. I'm going to talk about State Street now a little bit. So I'm on the Business Improvement District Board, and the Business Improvement District was created about 22 years ago as a marketing arm, primarily for the first floor retail businesses on State Street and around the square, to create a focus for that, because we felt that was needed outside of the advocacy and other policy work that Downtown Madison Inc. was involved in. It's State Street, it's the square, and 1 block off, 2 blocks off the avenues. So that's the geographic area. There are 393 businesses in the bid, but just on State Street, there's 152. 42% are food and drink, 20%, only 20% retail, and 38% service. Many people don't know, and it seemed like the Common Council didn't know this when they were voting on some funding for the city. 82% of the businesses on State Street are locally owned. That's a great asset that we have. 6% are regional and 12% national. Today, what we have on State Street, however, with the 152 businesses, 50 are closed. That give and take 1 or 2. 17 temporarily closed because of COVID, hoping to reopen, and we will see this year, probably soon within the next month or so, how that goes. That is of great concern to all of us, and that's what we had in the 70s, a lot of empty storefronts. But back in the 70s, retail was a thing. Retail is not so much a thing anymore. It has amazed me as a commercial broker. I've been at the Mullins Group for 11 years, and all of our properties are downtown. I've not had one phone call from somebody who wanted to establish a retail business. Food, yes, but retail, no, which is, I know there have been some that have opened, mostly nationals that have been new. Doesn't seem like people are interested in that kind of a lifestyle or that kind of a business. And it's something that we'd like to change, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to do that. But it is a challenge. something that we definitely want to work on. So State Street, what we look at in the future is, what is State Street going to be? In the 70s, when Paul Soglin built the Capitol Concourse and the State Street Mall, he was the leader, and he came up with that concept to rebuild the infrastructure and to work on revitalizing the downtown, along with the downtown organizations. And it worked over time. It took time. And the other thing is that the state of Wisconsin had a commitment to keep their offices and centralize their offices in the downtown. And that helped keep our commercial office market very stable. In fact, I would say that Block 89, which is the urban land block where Park Bank and Walgreens is, may not have happened but for that commitment by the state, because their initial pre-leasing came mostly from the state of Wisconsin with some good tenants, and probably would not have happened from a financing standpoint without that. So that has been very important to our downtown. Unfortunately, I don't see that commitment anymore. Fred Risser and Tommy Thompson were really the leaders in that regard, a Democrat and a Republican. And we have a Republican legislature now, and all I've seen really is moving state offices out of the downtown. They're going mostly to Hilldale right now in that new development, which is still good for the city, got the employment, et cetera. But it is creating a vacancy that has to be refilled by the private sector. And with COVID having happened, that was like the wild card nobody anticipated. We're still waiting to see what kind of a result in our office occupancy will occur from that. We did some surveys of our major businesses around the square to find out if they were going to come back remotely, were they going to have a hybrid, were they going to close? And we got a pretty good response rate, over 50% response rate from all of the tenants in the major buildings. And it looked like about 25% might consider fully remote, but there was a lot of hybrid. I'm not convinced people are going to shrink down their businesses, because I think they might reposition the space so that people have more room, and fitting people into small cubicles may not be a thing of the future. We're just going to have to see. We're not there yet to understand it. But that could have an impact on the downtown. The future we have for growth in the downtown, there are two major parcels on the Capitol Square, which will be redeveloped at some point once they can generate leases. You've probably heard about urban land interest, which is over where the American Exchange Bank, that whole block. That is a huge $175 million redevelopment, of which 300,000 square feet is offices. And then Hovde will redevelop over where the History Museum is, whether they have that parcel or not. You probably have read that the History Museum is going to be rebuilt on East Washington Avenue instead of at the top of State Street. I'm a little sad about that, because I like the idea of it being at the top of State Street. It'll be off a bit to traffic, but it will be more accessible, I'm told, by buses. So that is one of the reasons they've moved as well. But Hovde has considerable property on Fairchild Street, and they will do, it'll be a very large project as well when market conditions allow. But other than that, around the square, everything's pretty much developed out. And State Street, because of the historic nature of State Street in people's minds, it actually is not a historic district, but there are very old buildings, and we all want to keep the character of State Street. I don't think you'll see too many more, although there is one on mid block being proposed, which is quite substantial. Too much new development there, but East Washington Avenue, that's where you're going to see the growth. And you could see $750 million worth of tax space there. Most of that is commercial, and that is a route for the bus rapid transit. So the idea is to increase the density along that street. We've already seen the dramatic changes of that street over the past 10 years. And I think it will continue because it's just, land is finite. So I expect a lot of new things there as well. I think that, you can talk about the downtown, or State Street and what we think will happen. I think we need something dramatic to happen. I don't think just putting on events, doing some promotions is going to fix State Street. I was talking to a commercial broker who does a lot of leasing on State Street, and she told me yesterday that she actually has some very strong local retailers and businesses that she's been showing space, and they won't even go to State Street because they're very concerned it's not predictable anymore what's going to happen every time we have a protest. No matter, it can be even a protest that's just people marching, they lose business, and they are so fragile right now. They're just going through COVID the last year, and it's going to be most of this year too. They're just hanging on. So everybody needs to support the businesses on State Street. But new businesses are concerned about losing their life savings by opening up something and not knowing if the street has stabilized yet. So I have confidence that it'll come back, but I don't think it's going to be very fast. And I think that we have to make sure that the public feels safe down there, and anywhere in the city for that matter. Safety, I think, has become a major issue for the city of Madison. And if we can make consumers and potential business people feel safe, we can start to repopulate those vacancies, we hope. But it's going to take a while. I definitely think it's going to take a while. I think lenders are going to be skittish. They're going to look really closely at the financials of anybody, because there is no more PPP money, or at least not right now. And I don't think there will be. So we've got quite a bit to overcome down there, and we need something different. And that we talk about buses relative to that. So the big controversy, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but you might have some questions on it. Many of us in the downtown and many of the business people would like to see the buses redirected, not away from it, but off State Street, so that we can create an entertainment district, and we can have more outdoor seating, and it's more pleasant to be on the street. There is a way to do it, but there needs to be the political will in the city of Madison to do it. And so far there is not. So I'll kind of end it there and see if there's some questions later.
Okay, Mark, you want to jump in? You've done quite a bit of work on State Street and other areas. Tell us what you found and maybe some reactions to some of this.
I will. I'm going to repeat a few things that Sue said, but I will. I should warn you, I'm not really used to speaking. I'm a writer and not a talker, but I will do my best. So I spent 3 months or so looking at what happened to State Street during the pandemic. I wound up writing close to 6,000 words over 3 stories that were posted online at the In Business magazine website in late February. So I started interviewing people in November and through December. I paint a pretty bleak, wintry picture of State Street. I checked in with a few of my sources in the past week, and they were more upbeat than they were before, almost optimistic. After all, it's springtime, and it's a springtime of hope. One commercial real estate broker who had been really very dark about the future said that perhaps he could see a light at the end of a very long tunnel. But my dark view really hasn't changed very much. State Street and the downtown have suffered a real blow, and it may literally take years to recover. And more importantly, there's a new model, as Sue was saying, is needed, is required to sustain the downtown into the future. Here are 4 reasons why I think the downtown finds itself in crisis. The customers have disappeared. Foot traffic has disappeared. This is poisonous for retail and restaurants. It's not a surprise. This is what happens in a pandemic lockdown. People are working at kitchen tables and they're not in their offices. Students are Zooming their classes. Bars and restaurants are in lockdown mode. Camp Randall and Nicole Center are not filled with fans who drink and eat to excess before and after the game. Tourism and conventions were or are all but dead. And ask yourself this, how many times have you been downtown in the past year? I asked myself this in November, early November, when I started doing the research for the story, and I realized that between March of 2020 and November of 2020, I'd been downtown exactly 3 times, which was ridiculous because I was always coming downtown to interview people and have lunch and be part of a lunch group. And I will say that one of the 3 times I was downtown, I did bump into Sue Springman. So that was good, which actually reminded me, this is the great thing about downtowns and urban areas. It's just when you're walking down the street, you bump into people and you have these spontaneous conversations. And you don't do this when you're Zooming, okay? So anyway, in round numbers from November 2019 to November 2020, foot traffic was down about 60% downtown, down about 60%. More recently, from pre-pandemic February 2020 to February 2021, the foot traffic was reduced about 40%. Better, but still disastrous. How disastrous? Lots of small businesses are closing, as Sue just talked about the vacancies, the vacant spots downtown. They're closing both downtown and across the city. I don't have hard numbers, Sue does, but Colin Murray, who runs the Dane Buy Local program, told me that 40%, 50%, maybe even 60% of local businesses may die within the next 2 years in the Madison area. Deb Archer, who ran the Convention Bureau for 27 years, told me, people don't understand how different our city is going to look and feel when the pandemic finally clears. So many of the stores and restaurants that we love will be gone. My third point, why I have sort of a dark view of things, my third point is Amazon. It is a beast. It is a colossus. It grows only stronger. It is killing small businesses. It's killing medium-sized businesses. Amazon's net sales hit $386 billion in 2020, up almost 40% from 2019. In the fourth quarter alone, Amazon hired 175,000 people to work in its warehouses. This is an old truism. It's not my line, but it grows only truer. Amazon doesn't want to dominate online sales. Amazon wants to be online sales. It wants to be the platform for all online sales. And I would say, watch out, healthcare. My own opinion is that we need antitrust enforcement. I hope it comes. I talked with Carol Schrader, who owns the iconic Orange Tree Imports. Carol has literally written the book. It's in its 4th printing on niche retailing. Carol says in her 45 years of selling stuff, this is the toughest time ever. The 4th and last reason for my dark take of the future for the downtown and State Street in particular is the sea change at City Hall that Sue talked about. The decades-old consensus that building up downtown neighborhoods, particularly the commercial districts, will benefit the city as a whole has collapsed. A new generation of leaders has taken charge and feels, rightly or wrongly, the city has poured way too much money into the downtown at the expense of poor and neglected neighborhoods. This backlash came to a head last July after downtown was trashed for a second time by rioting related to police violence in Minneapolis and Kenosha. There was big time damage in downtown Madison. I think around 70 or so stores were victimized. The mayor and Alder Verveer proposed a fund for repairs. Morally outraged council members and citizens shot the proposal down. Alder Kemble said the whitest and wealthiest neighborhoods already received the most resources in Madison, and that helping State Street businesses was, quote, quite literally institutional racism, close quote. Her sentiment was widely shared at public meetings. The fact that there weren't any Black-owned businesses on State Street, which is definitely a problem, was a major sticking point. A critic wrote, quote, if budgets are moral documents, how can we even consider giving $500,000 to an elite group privileged enough to own a downtown business? Said another critic, the history of Madison's downtown is one of corruption, exclusion, boosterism, and land grabbing. In a nutshell, the people who testified at this July council meeting, and many of the council members themselves, see State Street as a citadel of white economic power. That was the case they made. The problem, I would argue, or do argue, is that this vision does not square with reality. It's not an accurate portrayal of the facts. To begin with, most businesses on State Street are owned by women. Even more telling, there are many flourishing immigrant-owned businesses: Pakistani, Portuguese, Nepalese, Mexican, Greek, Korean, Laotian, Turkish, Syrian, and Colombian, according to one survey. This includes more than 30 businesses owned by Chinese Americans. I would argue that this is the most ignored population in the city. These are not the so-called model minority Asian Americans. They are not college professors, doctors, or scientists. They don't start tech companies. They are first generation working class Chinese Americans. They are real assets to this town. They mostly run restaurants. They put in 12, 14 hours a day. They live and work in the shadows of Madison, as one of their advocates told me. I found it stunning that the city council seemed totally ignorant of their presence on State Street. So here's the bottom line, so to speak. Shift gears here. As Sue said, a strong downtown has paid big benefits for the city as a whole. The downtown tax base exceeded $3 billion in 2020, a hike of $1.2 billion from 2011. 1% of Madison's land mass was producing 10.5% of the city tax base. But the pandemic has brought really big problems. Madison's hotels are reeling from the shutdown of the convention business and the crippling of tourism. The Madison Concourse Hotel and Governor's Club, for example, saw business plunge 70 to 80% in 2020, prompting major layoffs at the city's largest hotels, according to General Manager Steve Zanoni. Note that in 2020, the concourse was assessed at almost $34 million, which produced a total property tax bill of $778,000. The concourse is now prepared to appeal its 2021 assessment. It will not be alone. The surge in unrented storefronts and with many of the remaining tenants in arrears on their rent does not bode well. Fact is, the downtown's diminished economic vitality will probably weaken the city's financial ability to help those poor neighborhoods that the city council wants served. Former Mayor Paul Soglin told me that the downtown properties will probably decline 15 to 25% in value. A tax attorney I interviewed predicted an even larger drop. He expects a rush this spring of downtown property owners opening their red-drenched books to the city assessor and making a quote slam dunk close quote case for lower assessments. If this happens, these lowered assessments will produce less tax revenue, which will shift the tax levy burden to homeowners. And by all accounts, Madison's residential real estate market is booming. What does this mean? It could either mean a big tax hike for homeowners in the 2022 budget, or a cutback in those neighborhood programs that we want to support. There is a wild card that may save Madison's butt, and a massive federal stimulus package may bail out struggling state and local governments. We'll see if it comes. But even if it does come, the stimulus will not determine the future of Madison's downtown. We are clearly at a turning point where the decline of local retail may, unless the city intervenes forcefully, turn State Street into an entertainment district, populated heavily with bars and restaurants. As a skeptic told me, Sue, that means State Street will turn into Madison's Bourbon Street. And this person is not looking forward to that. So I would say that unless a new vision is forged for the downtown, we have problems. The big question is, can City Hall deal with those problems? And like Sue, I'm right now a skeptic.
Oh, well.
This is the short version of the story.
That's certainly not a great upbeat thing. Well, I don't know where we want to start with this. Sue, you want to respond to some of the things Marc said?
Oh, Marc's just talking reality. I mean, as I said, I hope it comes. I think it'll come back eventually, but it's going to take a long time. And I agree with them. You're going to see reduced tax base for a while. We actually own a hotel up on the Capitol Square, and I would say our business was down 95% in 2020. We don't anticipate a recovery until 2023. Most hotels don't. So, people's lives have just changed in how they operate and what they do. I do think people want to get out, but we're not quite sure how it's all going to end. I mean, I love Madison, the stuff that Aaron talks about. I mean, we are really fortunate to have the university, and we're really fortunate downtown to have the university on one end and the state capitol on the other end. And the other thing that has happened down here is we have added a lot of housing and people who live here that are not students. When I ran the downtown group in the 1980s, we had what was called a Central City Mixed Housing Committee. And our whole goal back then was to bring housing that wasn't just student oriented to Madison. This was in the 1980s. It didn't start happening until the 2020s. I mean, really. And but it is here, and it hopefully will continue. I'm a little concerned about people who are not students wanting to be downtown right now, because you come downtown because of liveliness, not very lively right now. So I don't know if that'll slow down, but we all need to support it and work towards we need a change, and we need some leadership in the city.
So Sue, why would getting the buses off, why would that work now? I think, Kurt, you talk about Eugene, Oregon, where your sister is, and it's full of homeless folks and closed stores.
That is a concern, that if the city doesn't take care of that issue and panhandling so that people feel safe, that's what could happen. They have ways around that, I think, if they create it more like a park. There are legal complications, though, with the street. Well, have you dined on State Street and had buses sitting in front of you with how loud they are and the noise going back and forth? It doesn't create a very pleasant environment. We need the buses to bring people to the area. But what's interesting is there is no data that shows where people are coming from or where they're going when they get on and off the bus on State Street. What I'm told is, well, we need them on State Street because all those people get on and off on State Street. Well, that's because where the bus stops are. But where are they actually coming from? We don't have any of that data. We need to look at that. You could locate it close by. very close by and have to walk a couple blocks, but you could create just a more pleasant environment for a change. I know there's been a study, DMI did a study that Marc has talked about, which said that pedestrian malls have been failures. And many of them were, because they were started in the 70s. But we started one in the 70s on the 700 and 800 block of State Street, which people forget. It's been very successful down there, but it's unique because it's university oriented. And the attributes, the characteristics of what makes a successful, where there are successful malls, we have the university, the lakes, the Capitol, all the housing that's down here already. And we have a good transportation system. We have a lot of those attributes that could lend themselves. Maybe it's not the whole street. Maybe it's just part of the street. We want to add lights. The city won't let us put lights up. We've always talked about having lights going across the street, making it bright and festive at night. We don't want a Bourbon Street. And I think I know who said that, Marc. We do have to look at the issue of too much drinking, but you need food. People love to eat out. Go to any city. I mean, I'm in Naples and they have a downtown their downtown with all the restaurants. It's incredible. People are just all over the place. They've got music on every corner and people outside eating. They of course have better weather than we do. So that doesn't help. But if we didn't have all the buses, maybe we could also create some alternative designs to the exteriors of buildings that might lend themselves to that. There's challenges, but you just have to know what they are and try to address them best you can.
So thinking about what you've all been saying, and Aaron, what you said at the beginning about geography and just move out one more cornfield. So if where is the next cornfield going for us? What part of the city outside of Madison is this happening? And is there a chance to not have it just be a cornfield, but a whole neighborhood, a walkable place? But if they're not downtown, are they going to be on the east side? They're going out toward Oregon, Fitchburg. Where is it going?
Well, I see Hildale is the second downtown already. Call it Midtown.
I actually am, more optimistic. I think, there's no doubt that the pandemic has hurt downtown and has caused a lot of pain for a lot of people. And it's going to take a while to recover from that. But if you kind of zoom back and look at the sweep of Madison's history, when I was in college, when I was taking Professor Drisang's class, there was no reason you would ever go up past the top of State Street unless you wanted to get a teddy wedger. And, in the 90s, as Sue kind of articulated, ULI came in and redeveloped Block 89. The downtown developed a very lively environment, which is now under a lot of pressure. When I was at the city as economic development director, we launched the purchase of the Don Miller car dealerships and the remediation of those sites and the redevelopment of those sites to start to stretch downtown down East Washington. And that, I think, has been remarkably successful as an example of how city government can jumpstart private development in places. And so to me, I think the way that this goes wrong, I think the danger for the city council is if they focus kind of on little tiny single topics that are so narrow. Like, so you just heard Marc kind of expressing how this summer it was okay to ignore Asian immigrants, because you were trying to prioritize Black residents. And, now 3 months later, after the tragedy in the South, the shooting in the South, that would never happen in our current political climate. That was a moment in time and a depressing one. And so what we need to do is we need to expand our thinking and be systems thinkers. And we need to think about how our problems are intertwined. And so, for example, if you follow the city council, you'll hear them talk about lack of access to transportation, lack of access to jobs, lack of access to childcare, food deserts, pockets of poverty. And all of these things are intertwined with our development pattern. When you push your corporate headquarters like Fiskars and Spectrum Brands and American family to the outskirts of your community, that makes it almost impossible to get to those employers without a car. So already you've completely eliminated any chance for anyone to get a job there. Exact Science, to their credit, is one of the only major corporate headquarters that's inside of the Beltline. I started off, I had a picture of the headquarters that we built for them at Research Park. So what I think we need to do is we need to think about how we can kind of create a healthier system by creating these whole neighborhoods. State Street and downtown has to be one of them, has to be, that's the anchor for all the reasons that Mark and Sue have been talking about. East Washington corridor and Park Street are kind of opportunities to stretch that. Hilldale and that corridor, the Madison Yards project, is a chance to bring that west. And as that bus rapid transit line that's planned for that corridor stretches down, the city's working on an Odana Road plan. They're talking about basically the stretch between West Town Mall and Research Park, and how all of that aging commercial stock can get modernized and retrofitted and to a large degree infilled and turned not just from a place with office and retail, but also housing, so that you can live and work in a more walkable environment. And that's to me what we need to do. We need to be thinking about the system at the system level, about how we can heal some of this damage and do it. And I think if we can pull that off, the future is very bright for Madison once we get through the divot that was caused by the pandemic.
Can I mention one thing, though? I think we haven't touched on, and I don't think we have time to explore it, but I have concern about retaining people in the city of Madison living, because there aren't a lot of new places for growth for housing anyway. And if you look at the growth of Madison, you also have to look at the growth of all the communities around Madison. It is incredible. I tried to get a bus tour for the council to go visit all those little communities. They're not little communities anymore. Sun Prairie, used to joke about Sun Prairie. Sun Prairie is a city by itself now. It doesn't need Madison so much as it used to. In fact, if you look at the east side, many of those retailers have gone to Sun Prairie and they have vacated the Easttown area for whatever reason, some of which was it was too difficult to get their projects through the city. And they just said, well, forget it. We're just going to jump the interstate and we're going to go over to Sun Prairie where they were able to build. So that's that sprawl that Aaron talks about. But the schools, if we don't have a strong school system here, that is, I think, something that we need more community discussion about in order to retain Madison's strength. We need people who live here. Look at all the people who've left the city limits, and people don't like talking about it, but I think we really need a lot of discussion about it. We need to keep those schools strong.
Oh. Mark, did you want to jump in on any of this?
Well, first I would second what Sue just said, the importance of the Madison schools. It's hard to underestimate how important they are. And there's serious questions about what's going on, about the continuing failure of the schools to educate kids of color. There's just a stunningly poor performance of these kids in terms of reading and math. And that has to be dealt with at some point. I was going to bring up one development possibility that I've just been puzzled why it's not gotten more attention from the city. And that's been the long-running plan to redevelop the Alliant Energy Center and to connect it with South Madison and to bring in other public spaces and potentially to actually build a land bridge over John Nolan Drive and connect the property with the waterfront. Unless I'm missing something, and I could be missing something here, the city does not seem to be an active player in this, even though the city will be annexing the Alliant Energy Center in 2 years, 3 years, 1 year? I'm not even sure when it is. It's coming, but there doesn't seem to be much attention to what's going on there. And there's in various parklands, if memory serves me, there's like 500-600 acres that are owned by public bodies there. And it has extraordinary potential. But I'm not sure that it's getting the attention that it deserves. Aaron or Sue, do you guys have any thoughts on this?
The Lion Energy Center is owned by the county. So the tragedy would be if the redevelopment of that site got tripped up in city county, turf battles, because that's an incredible opportunity. And when I worked for Paul Soglin, he was very interested in thinking about what could happen there. It's a huge amount of land that's really close to downtown, right there on the lake, as you pointed out, with some amazing park infrastructure. There's a lot of hotels that support visitors to events at the open already, and that could really be a gem. I think the county is out right now looking for development partners. So I haven't followed it closely, but there was some news recently about their search for partners.
I think the problem is that the county owns it, and the city and the county have not had the best relations for quite a long time and have not really learned how to work that well together. I think it's 2022 or 23 when that land comes into the city of Madison. So that will help. And you're right, Aaron, the city or the county went out with an RFP, but it's a much scaled back version. There was a joint committee and the city was at the table on it, and Vanderwall Planning was involved in doing a very comprehensive plan for that area. And then it was kind of moving along, and then COVID hit and it just stopped. So hopefully it can get back moving and the city will be more involved as it takes over more of the land. But, the county doesn't do development. I think that's part of the problem. They don't have a planning department like the city of Madison. They don't do that kind of visioning. That's not been in the county government scope. So I think that's part of the problem too. And sometimes I think the county doesn't think Madison's part of the county, and vice versa. We kind of operate. Sometimes I see this attitude, oh, we're the city and we're the county. Well, aren't we all in the same geographic area? Need to learn to work together better.
So Sue, what's going to be the impact if a place like Target comes into State Street? Will that fit what you see the vision?
Well, I'm really sorry that Under Armour decided to end its lease, because Under Armour was it was a national, but it was a unique business that you couldn't find someplace else. So you'd come to State Street for it. I would like to see specialty businesses that you can't find elsewhere on that street, not the only thing. The building they're going into is only 15,000 square feet. So a typical Target is 120,000 square feet or 160. I think Hilldale is 60,000. And the smallest urban Target I've ever seen is on the campus of Minnesota, and that's 30,000. So I actually tried to get a 60,000 square foot Target to locate on the second floor of University Square when I worked for executive management. I thought that would have been fantastic because it could have brought some of the goods and that were needed to people who are living downtown, and all the new housing. You need to go get hand towels or dishes or whatever. I'm afraid this one's going to be a little bit too much like what we already have on the street. You can get at Walgreens, but we'll see when they come. I hope they don't hurt the small local mom and pops and add a product mix to the street.
Well, we got a couple of questions going to pop out to you. What's wrong with Bourbon Street? What's wrong with being a Bourbon Street?
A lot of drunken people just careening around, and it's different than a retail environment. It's an entertainment environment, and as Sue mentioned earlier, there's been an evolution away from retail on State Street, and that can be documented. But it is, I think that's the problem. I mean, there's an argument for keeping these unique stores on State Street and in the area. They are part of the community's identity, and I guess that's, in a nutshell, that would be it.
This community doesn't tend to like national or regional retailers. They want small, locally owned. But really what State Street has always needed is to have some of those strong nationals in addition to the locally owned, because the nationals have the money to do the advertising, to bring people down, and then they can also shop at the locally owned. But there are people in the community that just every time you mention, and I don't mean to disparage Target. I love Target. I do go to Target, but I don't think it's going to be the Target we're all used to. And that will add something to the street, unfortunately. The Bourbon Street, the first 2 blocks of State Street, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they're totally different blocks in terms of market. 5 and 6 are very student oriented. And the problems we've had with alcohol downtown are mostly generated in the student area, 500-600 in University Avenue. It's not around the square where we've got restaurants or in Upper State Street. It's mostly in that high dense, we've got a bar that's got a capacity of 1,000. That's generated difficulty. We can't have it evolve into more of that up and down the street. We want to bring a mixture of people downtown from all over. Visitors and people who live around here who want to dine out, and hopefully that would not turn into a Bourbon Street, but would be an entertainment area.
We have a question, wonders to mention about the core spaces proposal to make the new facades look historic. Want to address that?
I haven't seen the exact plans. So I'm not exactly sure if they're just saving the facade. They call that a facadectomy nowadays in the Landmarks Commission. And I know that there's they're wanting to build student housing, which is pretty dense further back from State Street. I just hope that what they do is of a smaller scale along State Street and that it doesn't overpower the street, because that would change the feeling on it. And I'm not exactly sure where that is. There's very little retail in that. I think only 15,000 square feet. So I'm not sure what kind of retail they'll bring. In their project on Lower State Street, it's mostly national food type businesses. So I'm not sure. And I'm not sure why we need more student housing either, quite frankly, new student housing. I think we need more affordable student housing. Because the campus is.
What's your feeling about a design district being placed over State Street and its environment?
Well, you have to go to urban design for everything you do on State Street anyway. It is an urban design district.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
But it's not a historic preservation district.
No, there's a difference between National Register and local historic. Portion of it is, I think, local historic, but not national. That always, property owners get very, very worried about that. And there may be some merit to it. You know, it is an issue how the age of many of those buildings, they're really old and they're not sprinklered, they're wood frame. When you try to combine different storefronts, you have a floor who's here and here next door. It's not easy to combine. We've got stores that are 800 square feet. They're not really even large enough to.
There's a case to be made that this is a good thing that you're talking about, that you're describing, that it should require small businesses, that it's really a niche kind of environment for smaller businesses. And you
can find people who want to open up small businesses. I mean, really look around the whole city of Madison. What do you see? How many coffee shops do you see? I mean, you can have hair salons, but how many new small owned retailers do you see anywhere?
It's a great question.
Part of what's happened is the way people start companies has totally changed, right? So if you wanted to start a boutique lighting company 40 years ago, you'd open up your storefront. Well, today you do it online. So to me, the emblematic story of what you're talking about is the little mom and pop shop that opened up on campus. They were going to sell high-end jeans. They were going to have stores that they were going to open in, 30 or 50 cities. They never got more than one store open, Madison, because they started retailing online and they did so much better. And why wouldn't we want Madison entrepreneurs to have access to the national or the global market instead of just the Madison market? And the next thing you know, they sold that company to Amazon, and it's called ShopBop.
Yeah, right. Well, the retailers that are successful are also online, and they have all said to me that the reason they've survived so far, especially during the pandemic, is they were online. For Imagination, Little Luxuries, Soap Opera. If they hadn't been, they may not be open right now. So we in the bid have talked about, and the city should talk about this. How can we help some of those small businesses figure out how to do an online operation? It's not that easy. They have no place to store merchandise. So you don't have 15 blouses or 50 blouses of the same style. Like, you can go on Macy's online and they'll always have the product. It's much more difficult for them to sell online. And it's the issue of home delivery too. We've talked about having an overall delivery zone that we would coordinate for everybody, but it's a big lift. We'll probably go back and look at it, but it could be very helpful, but it's a big lift to do it.
So a couple of folks are asking, is the mayor really aware of the seriousness of this? The mayor and the staff, are they really working in it? With the way the pictures you painted here, there's a couple of questions about that, including the number of Asian Americans, which is, somebody said, I looked up, there are more Asians than African Americans. Is there really city leaders thinking about this in the way they need to?
Well, they're aware of this now because a lot of this has been brought to their attention. And one thing I want to say is, I think the question of, we need to ask ourselves relative to why aren't there any Black businesses downtown? It's not that a commercial property owner would not have leased anybody. I've never had a Black business person ask to lease a storefront. The question is, why aren't they? What is it? Now, some people have said, well, we need to reduce the rents on State Street. Well, you reduce the rents, that means you reduce the tax base, the value of the buildings. And so that economic engine of the downtown is going to go away. But our rents are not much different than they are in Monroe Street. And definitely Hilldale is higher than we are. And even some of the new stuff on University Avenue on the first floor of this multifamily isn't much less than what people are paying. And I don't even know if it is less, to tell you the truth, because I've seen rent rolls on State Street. So do we want to offer $10 a square foot versus $30 a square foot rents to try to get people in? Are they going to survive? Is there the market there? That's not just the question. The question is this the air? Are you going to get your market downtown for whatever it is you want to sell? And why aren't Black Americans opening more businesses? We are creating some space. Urban Land is donating the American Exchange building and the building next door to the Boys and Girls Club. And they're going to bring some programs down, and they're going to try to do some pop-ups there. And then also another developer on State Street is going to donate 2 of his vacant spaces to pop-ups. And we're working with the Latino Chamber for them to bring in some of their business people, and they can, test market on State Street. So we're trying to do some things that are a little bit different.
I'm actually pretty impressed with the mayor. She came into office, she was articulating 4 priority goals, increasing the supply and the affordability of housing, implementing bus rapid transit, fighting climate change and increasing our resiliency, and addressing equity in the city. And so I think, she when I'm talking about systems thinking, she really is thinking on that level. She's thinking about the relationship between housing and transit and equity and how those things fit together. And so I think that she gets it. I think the question is, are we going to have the political will to overcome kind of some of these symbolic issues that we've been talking about, to kind of get at those core system issues and use all the tools in our toolkit. For example, we haven't really talked about tax increment financing or TIF today, but that's a tool that the city of Madison tends to underutilize in order to promote the kind of development that it wants. And so I think the city has opportunities to address some of these problems. And I think the mayor is thinking about it in the right way, but they have to marshal the political will to take action and to help the struggling businesses that are trying to recover from the pandemic, to set a strategy for places like State Street, to engage in the county with the energy center opportunity, and then to think about some of the areas that I've been kind of focused on, whether they're Hilldale or Oscar Mayer or Cap East or Park Street, where we have big opportunities to do infill projects.
And she needs a common council that will support those initiatives. I mean, quite frankly, who wants to run for public office today? It's a real issue. I mean, you don't have business people running anymore, people who understand what it takes to run a business. And we used to have people on the council that were retired or had been in business. They weren't the only ones. They were, a handful, but it always helped educate council members about some of these issues. Sometimes I think we need to go back and give a class on Econ 101, because there's not a real understanding sometimes of what it takes to finance a project, what it takes to run a business, what your economic challenges are. I wish there was more knowledge, but again, who wants to run for office it's not an easy position.
Well, and of course, this is not just at a city level. Aaron, I often think about when Quad Graphics was going to put a major plant in downtown Milwaukee, and the DNR said, it's a non-attainment area, and so there would be some pollution, and therefore these jobs could not be in the Milwaukee County. And so they went right across the line, literally a quarter mile of, I'm blanking on the county, and established it there. Well, the idea was you're going to have a lot of opportunities for minorities and others to have jobs at Quad. Now it's out in a place where there's no bus service, there's nothing. And of course, the whole issue came up again with Foxconn, the system of, if you have these places, but if people can't get to them, and having equitable transportation. My son, who is a transportation expert, talks about the dignity of transportation. He said it doesn't matter whether you're using your tennis shoes or a Tesla. There's a dignity to transportation, and it should not be divided up along those lines. And you've got that kind of systems. I'm also reminded of Don Nichols, our former economist at UW, who's gone now, but thinking also about how we do work. He said, start thinking about, he kept track of how much plastic versus steel was in a car. And he would ask questions like, how many emails does it take to build a Boeing 727? Not the manufacturing piece of it, but that business services, and thinking about where people work, what we do, how we think in a very broad, systemic way. I think has always been a challenge. So it's not just at state, it's not just at city, we're seeing it at the state level and others too, I think.
Yeah, and when you think about Madison's history, we've actually made quite a lot of progress. Sue was pointing out that there used to not be housing other than for students downtown, and today, we've brought lots of housing into the downtown area, and hopefully that pattern will continue. There used to not be, we used to build everything to be auto oriented, and the whole pattern of development from post World War II through the 80s was really around single use zoning. So you drive to the mall and shop, you drive to your office park and you work, and then you drive home to your residential neighborhood. And so if we want to make a more equitable place that is healthier, we need more of these whole neighborhoods where you have at least a chance of living within walking or biking or bus distance from your place of employment. You need to be able to, shop in the area that's around there. So, what we've done downtown to bring both employers and housing there is great. And we need to do that in more places. East Washington was a great start, but we need more of these whole neighborhoods so that we can address equity issues and so that we can, capture these spillover effects that I was talking about when people have the kind of serendipitous encounters that Marc had when he ran into Sue when he was downtown one of his 3 times this year.
I'm struck by the sense that Madison and Dane County have been somewhat lucky in that things have not gotten worse. I'm struck by the lack of coordination in the metro area and the county and the city. and the consequences have not been that severe yet, but I think they could be severe. The communities that have done the best, I think, are ones that take a regional approach. As you guys probably know, that the Twin Cities has a tax-based sharing system for like 6 counties. Okay, so part of if a new office headquarters is built in St. Paul, a portion of the added tax base is apportioned according to the poverty, or I think the per capita income of the various communities in the 6 county area. So these other communities actually share in tax base when something is built in St. Paul or built in Minneapolis. That strikes me as a good way to finance regional facilities and to get people thinking about regional development. Madison hasn't done this in, I don't know, what, 20 or 30 years, not since the days of Joel Skornica and Jonathan Berry. And I'm struck at times where I hear city officials talk or candidates talk about what's Madison going to do about affordable housing? What's Madison going to do about low-income housing? What you don't hear is somebody saying, well, what's the region going to do? What's the metro area going to do? Shouldn't we be doing this on a metro area? And there's all sorts of stuff like that that should be viewed, I think, of the bigger vantage point of what's going on. And it's not happening. And we've been lucky, I think. What do you guys think? Pro or con?
I mean, I think that what you're talking about, that's how you optimize a system, right? You don't try to optimize a part, you optimize across the entire region. So you're kind of talking about the first best thing. The second best thing would be for Madison to be very aggressive and try to grab as much of the quality development inside its borders as they can. And we're actually doing the worst thing, which is the suburbs are the aggressors, and we're sort of letting companies and development opportunities bleed off. So a company in Madison might get $1 million TIF subsidy to put up a new facility in Madison. You might get $6 million from Verona or $10 million from Middleton. And so, the suburbs have, if you look at where development is occurring in the county, it used to be that Madison was the dominant share of the tax base in the county, and that declined until about 2010. And then the one thing that sort of saved Madison for a while was the multifamily apartment boom. So when Sue and others started building apartments that were proximate to the downtown, that sort of stabilized it for a while. But what you're talking about, Mark, is an ideal world, but even if we can't get all the way to that, it would still be good for Madison to be trying to really be the visionary driver of the development pattern in the county, because they're the gorilla. They're the ones who should be doing it.
Right, I agree.
Sue will give you the last word on this before we turn it over to Dennis, and I want to thank you guys for that. But Sue, your turn on that.
I'm just agreeing with Aaron and Mark. I totally agree with you. You both. I mean, we do need a regional approach, and we used to talk about it years ago, but
Don't
we
talk
don't
about
it anymore. I don't know where it disappeared.
Interesting that one question one person did bring up was Phil Lewis, who was, of course, a lion of this. And I remember visiting with him shortly before he died, and looked at his railroad systems of things in and out of the county. And he was a phenomenal guy. And I just want to bring his name up for all the things that he thought about with this district, and to honor his work and thinking on this. Yep. Dennis?
Well, thanks again to Terry and Kurt for putting this panel together. And thank all of you, Mark, Susan, and Aaron. Very rich discussion from some very thoughtful and thought-provoking and informed people. And Mark and Susan, you join Aaron in today's performance. It's an A+. Aaron's always A plus.
That's like great inflation, Dennis.
So nobody's ever accused me of that. So we'll sign off. 2 weeks from today, we're going to be talking about food. Hope
Yeah.
everybody's hungry for that. And then our final 2 sessions will be in May, and we're going to be talking about gerrymandering. So hope everybody has a great day and a great 2
Thank you.
weeks. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.